Now we come to the three main topics of the month. And today we are going to talk about number one, Donald Trump's peace deal to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Number two, China-Japan tensions rise to dangerous levels. And ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking about this for a while. Sorry to hoot our own trumpet. And number three, rising concerns over stock market bubble. So number one, Donald Trump's peace deal to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Take it away, Glenn.
I am speechless. Colleagues of mine and I used to say to each other, it was a standard line, as it were, in the CIA decades ago, that the government could save a lot of money. And some of our colleagues on Fair Observer will smile at this. I'm thinking of one in particular. The government could save a lot of money if they fired all of us and simply gave a subscription of The Economist to all the policymakers. All of the policymakers or parliamentarians in the United States government. I suppose that is debatable. Today, one might simply suggest that instead of reading the news and following all of these issues, that based on Atul's canvas of the current issues, all we need to do is to read Joseph Heller and Catch-22 or Jonathan Kennedy O'Toole in A Confederacy of Dunces, or the Flashman novels, whichever is more absurd than the other and farcical, and then you'll have an insight into actually the lunacy that we're living, which is gravely disturbing for anyone who is rational of just about any political persuasion. The things have come undone and are not stitching together economically, although that hasn't yet exploded. Certainly politically, we know, internationally, and so on. So let's talk about what Atul misnamed the Donald Trump peace deal. Actually, it's initially it was a 28-point plan, and some astute observers, when they first read it, thought, well, this is very stilted English. And it appears that it is actually Russian. And that is not a joke. That is not a joke. This is not some skit on late night television, but a number of linguists.
And that's our next career, Glenn. We should be on late night television soon.
Boy. Oh my God. A number of linguists and diplomats and other experts have read the text in ostensibly American English, and said this really does sound like it has been directly translated from the Russian. And that is literally true. That is what happened. The Russians provided through Donald Trump's, quote, envoy, unquote, the real estate developer from southern Florida.
Who's a brilliant man. Don't laugh at him.
That's correct. Look where he is and look where we are.
He's made more money than us.
In probably 2 minutes, he has, yes. But that's not hard in my case to earn more money than I have. But
well, I'm even poorer than you, so that's quite easy in my case. You can work for McDonald's and beat me.
So the truth appears to be that Russia provided the Americans with what they thought would be an acceptable peace arrangement, and then the Americans translated it and are presenting it as Trump's plan. This didn't go over well in a lot of places, even among some of Trump's supporters in the American Congress. And the initial plan, which had 28 points, has been somewhat modified. But fundamentally, the essence of the plan really is Russia's starting position. And I will tell you quite seriously, and I think everyone will know this, whether you're a businessman or a negotiator in politics, that whoever wields the pen, whoever drafts and frames the initial points of discussion, has won the argument almost, because everyone then is reacting to what you have presented as the framework for discussion and decision. You can revise it entirely, but almost always the essence of and direction of the debate and the decisions will then be far closer to the original drafter's intent than to those who are reacting to, or on their back foot diplomatically and at the negotiating table. And that is what has happened. Now, fundamentally, what does the prospective agreement say? And rather than peace agreement, frankly, this will amount to a ceasefire of perhaps long duration, but rather than a peace agreement. Both sides, it appears, are going to agree to stop shooting, at least for the time being. Well, it would require Ukraine to withdraw from territory that it still controls. Now, the Ukrainians have said that this is a non-starter, but there seems to be, bending and hewing and debating and slicing of that. So there probably will be some territorial adjustments from where
to be fair, Glenn, the Ukrainians, they have their backs to the wall and a gun to their head. When it comes to their economy has cratered. When it comes to men, they have run out of men. There are desertions in front lines. When it comes to equipment, that's not any more forthcoming from the US. When it comes to intelligence sharing, they are scared that Trump only did once briefly. If Trump stops intelligence sharing and stops any kind of assistance, even technical, then they would be even more vulnerable. So they are caught between their own precarious and perilous condition and the dependence on the US. And add to it is this terrible corruption scandal raging at the heart of government. So the Ukrainians do not have any good cards at the moment. So what can they do? They have to go along with Donald Trump.
There are strong incentives and imperatives that push them towards finding some way to stop the war. Certainly. I'm not, as we've frequently noted as you and I talk about this, I'm not as negative or alarmist about Ukraine's prospects, but certainly everything you said is there's at least a large measure of truth to everything you have said. But they have said, well, there's no reason nonetheless for us to cede. We won't cede territory that we continue to control. It appears there will be some sort of territorial adjustments, although I would suspect less substantial than the Russian position, which is to give us all the Russian-speaking provinces, which is the Luhansk and Donetsk provinces, oblasts. They control all of Luhansk, the Russians. They control most of Donetsk, and they're demanding the remainder of it. I would be surprised were that to occur, but that's a sticking point now. In exchange, Ukraine would receive, quote, security guarantees. However, these are unspecified and verbal, and we literally have seen this before. The Europeans and the Americans and the Minsk Accords in 2014 provided, and the Russians accepted and acknowledged and recognized
Glenn,
security guarantees.
There's a catch. Should Ukraine act unilaterally against Russia, the guarantees are off. That's also in the document. And that is the important thing. It is as if the US has done an about turn, a U-turn, a volte-face, you'd say, and the Ukrainians face the prospect of being sold down the Dnipro River, which actually the Russians want as the natural border. And I suspect that the Russians would want to take Odessa as well at some point. That's the one place they probably cross the river. But very much Ukraine, Ukraine is in a pretty tough spot.
But the security guarantees that Ukraine has always argued for, because otherwise they say, this has happened before multiple times. It will, of course, happen again. So what guarantees do we have? And they were given them in 2014. We saw where that led. That led to today. They were given in the 1991, I guess it was, when the Soviet Union broke up and Ukraine surrendered its nuclear weapons. And that didn't, the guarantees didn't amount to much then either. Russia has demanded that Ukraine never be part of NATO. That appears to be conceded. But the Europeans are pushing now. They've injected themselves as best they can into this process, which is not too much. That there may be some, quote, non-NATO but West European troops in Ukraine as a tripwire security guarantee. Russia wanted Ukraine's military limited to 100,000 people, which is essentially a constabulary. The current Ukrainian military is 850,000.
Wasn't that the same number? Wasn't that the same number that the Allies imposed on Germany post Versailles? 100,000, if I remember correctly.
That's right. I think that's right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Which the Germans never respected. And one could hope that the Ukrainians prove as astute as the Germans did. But it now appears that the Russians have.
Do you really want the Ukrainians to go the same path as Nazi Germany? Come on.
No. But it does appear the Russians have made some sort of a concession here, and it's shaping up to be a Ukrainian military limit of about 600,000, which is actually a realistic number. They're currently $850,000. They cannot afford it. If they aren't fighting, there is no need to have such a large military. So 600,000 actually would seem to be a reasonable, significant number. And numbers are meaningless anyway.
You take a far more benign view. You take a far more benign view than Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell, who had their knickers in a knot. So I listened to them yesterday, and they were talking about the US has sold out on liberal democracy, on human rights, on state sovereignty, and they were just short of foaming at their mouths.
Well, I haven't got to my explode yet in indignation section. Fundamentally, I think that I agree. Just going over the details can seem bloodless, certainly. Rather than go through all of these points, none of which are yet formally decided, the larger point is that you'll have what most people anticipated, sensibly, which is that when the war ends, authority extends to, and sovereignty, to paraphrase Stalin, I think, or Mao, it's Mao, I guess, that's right, we went through this once before, to the extent that you have military forces in control of an area.
Oh, it throws through the barrel of a gun.
Yeah, and so you'll have mostly a ceasefire with the forces remaining in place, which means that Russia will have absorbed 90% of the Russian-speaking territories of Ukraine. Ukraine won't formally acknowledge that or accept that, but de facto can do nothing about it. The security guarantees for Ukraine may amount to the substance of some European soldiers who are not wearing NATO shoulder patches, and some American or NATO planes deployed to Poland. And then there was talk of unfreezing half of Russia's frozen assets and using that money for Ukrainian development. However, it appears that what that would mean in practice is that Donald Trump would have the money put into, quote, American bank accounts of some sort. So it would benefit the United States. And who knows if the Ukrainians would get, a number two pencil out of the entire thing. So it is fundamentally a ceasefire It doesn't, important to mention is that many of the clauses are steps to rehabilitate Russia and bring Russia back into the international community, and a member of the G8 once again, and various international fora, the end of sanctions. So it is a ceasefire that benefits Russia, de facto acknowledges its the areas it has conquered, has no further sanctions, lets them off the hook for that, and the guarantees for Ukraine are verbal, slightly more than that, and survival for the time being, which will probably be for the medium term. Medium term is 2 to 10 years, I suppose, because Russia has its own serious economic and military pressures and struggles, and the killing will stop. So it is largely a pro-Moscow shaped ceasefire.
Yeah, one could argue that, and which is what a lot of analysts are saying, that there will be an increased threat to the Baltic states. Russia will become emboldened after this. One argument, the extreme argument that the French defense, the French chief has said, is that French mothers should prepare to lose their children. There is a major confrontation with Russia coming. Rory Stewart said that the drumbeats of war, not exactly in these as many words, are now sounding. We are preparing, we are basically headed to war. That is one view. There is another view that one hears here among some people in the Pentagon and some people in the Republican establishment, that, look, the real enemy is China. Let's do a reverse Henry Kissinger. Let's wean off Russia from China and isolate China. And we have to end the war to do so. Besides, Ukraine is corrupt and Ukraine is not much of a benefit anymore to us. So this is a realpolitik decision.
All of which is profoundly offensive MAGA propaganda garbage, which comes halfway out of Moscow and distorts reality to the point that I almost want to. It's unrelated to reality. The change, the pivot towards China, it won't happen. China, it would be an issue whether.
No, they say Russia will pivot to the US. They think they can wean Russia off. And their grand strategy, Glenn, is that basically China is very vulnerable when it comes to energy. China imports almost, not all, but most of its energy. And if they can block the Malacca Strait, and if the Russians don't supply energy to China, then China is toast within weeks, not months.
Yeah, that's all delusional craziness, which would lead to world war. However, I would like to make one point rather than just to explode in frustration. That's what I think is such nonsense. Is that the Russians made a terrible strategic error in their invasion, and in a way, from the Russian perspective, they felt they didn't have a choice. What do I mean? Not only that the war has gone much worse for Russia than it had imagined it would, but the war came because of a failure of Russia's other strategic policy, which has been elsewhere dramatically successful. Russia tried, not through war, but through covert action and disinformation and aggressive intelligence operations, to stop Ukraine's turn to the West and to have essentially a puppet government and regime in Ukraine. And they failed because of the will, the desire of the Ukrainian people, thus the invasion. However, Russia, they're no dummies. And I don't agree that war is likely with Russia for Europe or for the US. But what is certain and is already ongoing is what we are seeing in Moldova, in Georgia, in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, in Ukraine, in the Baltics, in Poland, and to include the United States, England, and France, but in particular the states bordering Russia, and that is destabilization and actions to install favorably inclined political figures in the country's political processes. And that has
what is
happened
the
with
CIA doing to
varying
counter it?
large amounts of success. Sorry?
What is the CIA doing to counter it, Glenn? It's a game two can play.
Well, one would hope that they are, and I can only give historic examples. In post-war Italy, the United States, the CIA, was, and to this day, remains roundly denounced by right-thinking people, as in correctly thinking people, theoretically, for its interference in the Italian political process. And it is true that the CIA spent, I think it was $20 million in 1948 to affect the elections so that there would be a pro-democratic official or party elected rather than the communists who were, by definition, not Democrats.
The CIA also intervened in Greece. The CIA also intervened in Greece big time.
I'm just giving the one example of Italy to make the point. It's true that the United States spent $20 million. What isn't, for various reasons, has not created the same amount of outrage or concern or even consciousness, is that the KGB spent $200 million. So that's what's happening in Central and Eastern Europe today. What the CIA is doing, I don't know, but for all of the covert actions the CIA has engaged in and probably is engaging in, the CIA is acutely conscious of how likely it is that a covert action burns those who perpetrate it rather than warms those who it is seeking to affect.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.